ready to make some ancient Roman cash.
Okay, maybe not literally.
Probably not a good idea to start melting down your pennies.
Right, probably not.
But today, we are diving into the fascinating world of Roman economics,
Yeah, how they built wealth, what they valued.
all through the lens of everyday jobs.
That's right. And
Don't worry, no togas required.
we're going beyond the textbook stuff, though.
Yeah.
Think of it as time traveling to understand their motivations, their values.
And maybe even see some surprising parallels to our own world today.
Exactly.
Our source material is this really cool book,
It's called.
How to Make Money, an Ancient Guide to Wealth Management.
I love it.
It's a collection of primary sources, letters, legal documents, even epitaphs.
Which are fascinating.
Yeah.
They give us these amazing glimpses into how Romans at all levels of society thought about money.
Yeah, and it's not just about cold, hard cash either.
Right.
We're looking at the risks and rewards of different occupations.
Less financially and in terms of social standing.
Yeah, because for the Romans, those things were often intertwined
Absolutely.
in fascinating and sometimes contradictory ways.
Yeah, and that's what makes it so interesting.
But first, let's rewind to ancient Rome's roots. Let's talk about farming.
Okay.
Even as the Roman Empire, grew and their economy became more complex,
It became very complex.
that agrarian ideal remained really deeply ingrained in their culture.
Absolutely. And a great example is Cincinnatus,
Okay.
the citizen farmer who was literally called from his plow to become dictator during a crisis.
Talk about a career change.
I know, right?
From farmer to dictator, just like that.
And after defeating the enemy, you know what he did?
What did he do?
He immediately resigned from his dictatorship
Wow.
and went right back to his farm.
That's like the ultimate power move, you know? It shows how deeply ingrained that farmer-citizen ideal was in the Roman psyche.
He really does.
But like you said, things changed, right? Even in ancient Rome, they couldn't escape economic realities forever.
Right. Centuries after Cincinnatus, we see someone like Pliny the Younger,
Okay.
a wealthy landowner and politician, grappling with whether or not to buy more land.
It's a dilemma a lot of us face.
Exactly. And he's analyzing the financial pros and cons.
Of course.
But you can almost sense this internal struggle.
Yeah.
It's like he's caught between this traditional ideal of land ownership and the changing economic landscape of his time.
It's like he's doing a cost-benefit analysis.
Right.
But it's not just about the bottom line, it's about the image, the legacy. It's something we can relate to even today.
Absolutely.
And then there's Pliny the Elder, his uncle, who meticulously documented everything, including incredibly detailed advice on growing grapes.
And what's fascinating is how much of his advice still holds up today.
Really?
The importance of using cuttings for new shoots,
Oh, wow.
pruning at the right time. It's like reading a modern viticulture manual.
Wow, so some things never change.
I know, it's amazing, right?
It makes you wonder if that level of detail, that focus on mastering even the intricacies of grape growing,
Right.
says something about the Roman mindset.
It does, it really does.
This desire for control,
Yes,
for order, even in the face of a changing world.
that's a good point. And speaking of control and order, one story that really highlights the Roman values of hard work and tangible results is that of Caius Furius Cressimus.
Okay.
He was a former slave who became this incredibly successful farmer.
Great. A former slave. Now that's a story I want to hear.
Right. Well, his neighbors were apparently jealous of his success,
As neighbors can be.
and they accused him of using witchcraft to make his crops thrive.
No way.
Yes, so they hauled him into court.
Oh, no.
And you know what Cressimus did?
What'd he do?
He brought out his well-fed slaves, his meticulously maintained tools, his healthy, strong oxen, and basically said, "Look at this. This is my magic."
He's like, I'm not cheating. I'm just really good at this. What a boss move.
I know, right?
So did he win?
The court agreed. He was acquitted. But what's interesting isn't just that he won, but how he won.
Right.
It shows how much Romans valued tangible proof, practical demonstration.
They want to see it.
Right. It wasn't enough to simply claim you were a good farmer. You had to show it.
It's a very Roman way of thinking. But it also makes you think about the other side of the coin.
Yeah.
We're talking about landowners, successful farmers.
Yeah.
But what about those who didn't have that privilege? What about the laborers, the people who are actually working the land?
That's a crucial point.
Yeah.
The success stories, especially those coming from the elite, like Pliny, often leave out the voices of those who are most vulnerable.
Exactly. So how do we get a glimpse into their lives?
That's where sources like epitaphs can be surprisingly revealing. In our book, there's one commemorating a slave supervisor named Hippocrates.
Oh, okay.
But what makes this epitaph unique is that it wasn't dedicated by his master, but by the slaves he oversaw.
Wow.
They praised him for his fairness, his mild rule.
So they like him?
They did. It's like a whisper of appreciation from those who are often silenced in the official historical narratives.
It's a powerful reminder that even within a system as brutal as slavery, there were nuances, individual experiences, and sometimes even moments of human connection.
Definitely.
Okay, we've talked about the Roman relationship with land and agriculture, but their empire was built on more than just farming, right?
Exactly. Their trade networks stretched across the known world, bringing in goods and wealth from distant lands.
So next up, we're leaving the farm behind and diving into the bustling world of Roman commerce and banking.
Ooh, exciting.
Get ready, because this is where things get really interesting. So we just left off talking about how the Roman Empire was more than just farms, right?
Right.
And how they had these incredible trade networks spanning the known world. What kind of stuff were they even bringing in?
Well, imagine Roman soldiers stationed all the way up in northern England.
Okay.
We're talking hundreds of miles from Rome.
Wow.
And what are they buying?
Yeah. What are they buying?
Food, of course,
Yeah.
but also pottery, jewelry, even pepper imported all the way from India.
Pepper from India.
Yeah.
Talk about globalization, ancient Roman style.
I know, it's amazing, right?
But someone had to make all that trade happen.
Right.
The merchants, the bankers, they were the real deal makers,
They
right?
were. And this is where we see those Roman values clashing with economic realities
Okay.
in some really interesting ways.
Like what?
Take Cato the Elder, for example.
Okay.
We were just talking about him, praising the virtues of farming.
Right, right.
Well, he was also notorious for condemning money lending as immoral.
Wait a minute. I'm sensing some hypocrisy here.
A little bit, yeah. He condemned it,
Yeah.
but he also profited from it,
Oh.
especially through maritime loans, which were high-risk, high-reward ventures.
Okay, so he's not totally against it.
He's not totally against it now.
Just when other people do it.
Yeah, well, he even came up with ways to minimize his own risk.
Yeah.
He often required merchants to form companies and pledge their ships as collateral.
Okay.
So if the ship went down, he was still protected.
Clever. But more than a little sneaky, right? So much for condemning money lending.
Exactly.
Wow.
And Cato wasn't alone.
Really?
Roman law actually prohibiting senators from owning cargo ships
Huh?
because commerce was seen as less prestigious than land ownership.
Of course.
But many senators found ways to profit from trade indirectly,
Okay.
often through agents or freedmen.
So they found a loophole.
They found a loophole.
Sounds like some things never change, huh?
Right.
It's that do as I say, not as I do mentality.
But what's really fascinating are the actual Roman laws surrounding maritime loans.
Oh,
They provide this amazing window into how they thought about risk and reward,
okay.
especially in a time when sea voyages were incredibly dangerous.
Right, yeah, of course.
So, for example, one key principle was that borrowers didn't have to repay the loan until the ship and its cargo safely reached their destination.
Oh, that makes sense. I mean,
Right. You wouldn't want to be on the hook for a loan if your ship got caught in a storm or attacked by pirates.
exactly. The investor was the one bearing the risk of those kinds of losses.
Interesting.
That's why they often sent commissioners.
Okay.
Think of them like ancient Roman insurance adjusters
Okay.
to oversee the voyages and make sure the merchant wasn't being negligent or even trying to commit fraud.
Wow. So it's like an early form of venture capital, but
Right.
with like built-in safeguards
Safeguards, exactly.
to protect the investors.
And here's something even more surprising.
What's that?
Some of these legal cases involving maritime loans feature women as lenders.
Really?
Mm.
Women were involved in high finance like this?
They were. It challenges our assumptions about women's roles in ancient Roman society,
Yeah.
reminding us that they weren't completely excluded from financial activities.
That's really interesting.
Just like with farming, we see examples of social mobility within commerce.
Oh,
Remember Megist, the freedwoman we mentioned earlier?
right. Who became a successful greengrocer.
The one whose husband paid for that beautiful inscription
Yes.
on her tomb.
That inscription celebrates her entrepreneurial spirit,
Yeah.
but it also mentions her son's membership in a prestigious group.
Wow.
Within their tribe, it's a powerful testament to how success in commerce could elevate your social standing,
Right.
even if you had started life as a slave.
Wow, that's amazing.
So we've got farming, we've got trade,
Okay.
and we've seen how those pursuits could bring wealth and social mobility.
Yeah.
But even in ancient Rome, you couldn't escape the taxman, right?
No, I don't imagine you could.
No empire can function without funding its operations.
That's right. Speaking of money matters, let's talk about how the Roman government funded itself through a system of taxation
Yes,
that, as you might imagine, wasn't without its controversies.
of course.
Taxes, the one constant throughout history. So how did Roman taxation work?
Well, it's actually a pretty complex system.
I bet.
It had two main types of taxes, tributa and victigalia. Think of tributa as direct taxes, kind of like our income tax today,
Okay.
levied on land and individuals.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay.
What about the other one, vectigalia?
That one's a bit more like our sales taxes or tariffs, indirect taxes levied on goods and services.
Okay.
So, for example, if you were a Roman buying imported wine or olive oil,
Okay, got it.
you'd be paying vectigalia on those goods.
So far, so good.
Right.
So where does the controversy part come in?
Well, that's where the publicanes enter the picture.
Who are the publicani?
Those are private individuals or companies who essentially bid for the right to collect taxes on behalf of the state.
Wait a minute, the government outsourced tax collection.
They did. And as you can imagine, this system was ripe for abuse.
Oh, I can only imagine.
Right. The publicanes were infamous for their greed,
Yeah.
often squeezing as much as they could out of taxpayers to line their own pockets.
Of course, classic.
And this, of course, made them incredibly unpopular.
Right.
Even Cicero, who was generally sympathetic to the publicani, recognized the resentment they generated.
Yeah, I bet.
So we actually have a letter from Cicero
Okay.
to his brother,
Okay.
who was a provincial governor at the time.
Okay.
And in it, Cicero gives advice on how to manage these tax collectors and try to placate the taxpayers.
So he's writing to his brother for advice.
He's essentially coaching his brother on how to handle a PR nightmare.
That's amazing. So even in ancient Rome, they were dealing with political spin and damage control.
Exactly.
Wow.
But beyond just the day-to-day annoyances of taxes,
Right.
we also see how this intersection of finance and politics could have much higher stakes.
Okay.
Take the story of Rabirius Postumus, for example.
Okay.
He was a prominent banker who made a risky investment. He financed an Egyptian king's return to power,
Oh.
hoping for, a hefty return on his investment.
Talk about high-stakes gambling.
Right. And it backfired spectacularly.
Oh, no.
The king couldn't repay the loan, so Postumus tried to recoup his losses by collecting taxes in Egypt.
Okay.
But this led to a rebellion, and he ended up imprisoned.
Yikes. So much for that big payout.
He eventually escaped back to Rome,
Okay.
but then he was put on trial for extortion.
Oh, wow.
Luckily for him, he had Cicero as his lawyer
Oh, okay.
and was acquitted.
Wow. So even in ancient Rome, it paid to have good connections.
It did.
But it seems like this whole episode with Rabirius Postumus
Yeah,
highlights the risks involved in mixing finance and politics.
absolutely.
Something that's still relevant today, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
And sometimes that mix of power and money led to blatant corruption.
Yes.
Take the case of Verus, a Roman governor of Sicily.
A very interesting character.
How'd he do?
He was basically the epitome of a corrupt official. He systematically extorted money from the Sicilians,
How awful.
manipulating the legal system, even threatening violence.
That's awful. Didn't anyone try to stop him?
They did. Eventually, the Sicilians brought their complaints directly to Rome,
Oh, okay.
and Verus was put on trial. What's interesting is that even Cicero, who often defended powerful individuals, took on the role of prosecutor in this case.
Really? So even in a system that often favored the elite, justice could prevail.
It could, but it's important to remember the context.
What do you mean?
Verus' trial was as much about making an example of him
Right.
as it was about actual justice.
Okay.
By prosecuting Verus so publicly, the Roman Senate was able to distance itself from his blatant corruption
Okay.
and maintain the illusion of accountability.
It's a good reminder that even when we see instances of justice being served,
Yes,
there are often larger power dynamics at play.
exactly.
So we've seen how Romans made money
We have.
and sometimes lost it through farming, trade, and even through the murky waters of taxation and political maneuvering.
It's a dangerous world out there.
It is, but there's another fascinating aspect of Roman economics that we haven't touched on yet.
Right.
One that was intricately tied to the hearts and minds of the Roman people: entertainment. Ah, yes, bread and circuses. That's a phrase we hear a lot.
It is.
But what does it actually tell us about Roman society?
It's very telling.
I'm ready to enter the arena, bread and circuses. It's such a catchy phrase, right? But it really gets at how the Roman elite used entertainment as this powerful tool.
It wasn't just about keeping people entertained. It was a calculated strategy for social control. Keep the masses happy, give them something to rally behind, and they're less likely to focus on things like political unrest or economic inequality.
It's like the ancient Roman version of Keeping Up with the Kardashians, but on a much grander scale.
Exactly. And when it came to bread and circuses, no one understood the assignment. Quite like Julius Caesar. We often hear about his military conquests. But Caesar was also a master showman.
What kind of spectacles are we talking about here? Give me the details.
We're talking multilingual theater productions, gladiatorial combats featuring hundreds of fighters, and even elaborate mock naval battles, complete with real warships.
Hold on, real warships? Like on water? Where did they even...
You're not going to believe this. They actually dug out this huge artificial lake near the Tiber River, filled it with water, and brought in actual biremes and triremes, those massive warships with rows of oars from fleets stationed as far away as Lebanon and Egypt. Can you imagine the logistics of that?
Insane. And brilliant. It's like he was engineering these jaw-dropping spectacles to reinforce his power and influence.
Exactly. In a society where public image was everything, these grand gestures sent a very clear message. I am Caesar, and I am in control. But it wasn't just about the spectacle itself, it was also about how you advertised it.
Oh, right. Like those political ads we see everywhere today.
Exactly. We actually have examples from Pompeii of graffiti promoting gladiatorial shows and even political candidates. It's like ancient Roman campaign slogans.
Yeah.
Vote for Lucius, he throws the best games.
So they had to market their generosity and their entertainment. It sounds like a pretty effective, if not expensive, way to win over the masses.
It was definitely costly. Caesar racked up enormous debts to finance these events. He was basically betting that his popularity would translate into long-term power and influence. And for a while, it worked.
But not everyone was as skilled as Caesar at this game, right?
Right. Take the story of Tilius, for example. He decided to build an amphitheater to host gladiatorial games. Sounds like a good investment, right?
Well,
Except his amphitheater wasn't built quite up to Roman standards.
I sense a disaster in the making.
You've got it. During one of the games, the poorly constructed structure collapsed, killing thousands of spectators. It was a horrific tragedy that sent shockwaves throughout the Roman world.
Wow. A stark reminder that even entertainment can have serious and sometimes deadly consequences, especially when safety is compromised for profit. What happened after that? Did they just stop building amphitheaters?
Not exactly. The disaster actually led to new building codes and safety regulations for amphitheaters. It's a grim example of how sometimes it takes a tragedy to force people to take safety seriously.
It's like the ancient Roman equivalent of modern workplace safety regulations, after talking about Caesar's lavish displays. I'm curious about Augustus. He was known for being a bit more, shall we say, calculated than his predecessor. How did he handle this whole bread circuses thing?
Augustus was much more subtle in his approach. He understood that true power lay in making people believe they were the beneficiaries of your generosity. He continued to sponsor grand public works projects and lavish games, but instead of plastering his name all over everything, he emphasized how these projects benefited the Roman people.
It's like a subtler form of branding. It's not about, look at how great I am. It's more like, look at all the great things I'm doing for you. Pretty savvy.
Exactly. He was a master of public relations, even by today's standards. But as fascinating as this world of Roman economics is, the ambition, the risks, the rewards we have to acknowledge the darker side of how wealth was generated in Roman society. And that brings us to the uncomfortable realities of human trafficking and slavery.
It's a heavy topic, but one we can't shy away from. It's important to remember that the Roman world, for all its achievements, was built on a foundation that we would find morally reprehensible today.
Absolutely. The same systems that allowed for those incredible displays of wealth and entertainment, the trade networks, the labor forces also facilitated the exploitation of millions of people.
Let's start with prostitution. It existed in every level of Roman society, didn't it?
It did. Prostitution was legal and widespread, but it's crucial to remember that for the vast majority of those involved, especially women, this wasn't a choice.
So who were these women?
Most were slaves forced into this profession by their masters. They were treated as commodities, bought and sold, with their earnings going directly to their owners, and even for those who weren't legally slaves, the options were incredibly limited.
What do you mean?
Well, the Romans had this concept called infamia. Think of it as a permanent stain on your reputation. Certain professions, Prostitution being a major one carried this infamia.
So even if a woman escaped slavery, that stigma of prostitution would follow her.
It would impact her ability to get married, to find work, to participate fully in society. And it wasn't just limited to women male prostitutes. And even those who profited from prostitution like pimps also carried this social stigma.
Wow, it's hard to fathom that level of social control, and it's impossible to talk about Roman entertainment without talking about gladiators. They occupied such a strange place in Roman society, revered for their fighting skills, yet also stigmatized.
It's a perfect example of the contradictions inherent in Roman society.
Yeah.
They were celebrities in a way, with fans who idolized them, but their lives were incredibly brutal.
And like prostitutes, most gladiators were slaves.
They were bought and sold, trained to fight, and often facing death in the arena. They were controlled by laniste, the owners and managers of gladiatorial schools who held immense power over their lives.
It's a grim reminder of how easily human beings can be dehumanized and exploited when profit is the primary motivator. But there were attempts to regulate these systems, weren't there?
Even within that brutal system, there were efforts to impose some ethical boundaries. Emperor Marcus Aurelius, for example, passed laws to set maximum prices for hiring gladiators and to limit how much sponsors could spend on games.
So even in a world where human life was commodified for entertainment, there was a recognition that the system couldn't be completely unchecked.
Right, and we also see examples of individuals within the system, gladiators, who rose to fame, prostitutes, who found a way to buy their freedom, that remind us of the resilience of the human spirit.
Right.
But let's not kid ourselves. These were exceptions to truly understand Roman economics. We can't ignore the brutal realities of slavery that fueled so much of their prosperity.
It's the elephant in the room, isn't it? This entire system built on the backs of enslaved people who had absolutely no rights and whose labor was exploited to build the Roman Empire.
And it wasn't just in agriculture, as we talked about earlier. Slaves were involved in every aspect of the Roman economy: mining, manufacturing, construction, domestic service, even finance.
It's a sobering thought, and it makes you wonder, given how central slavery was to their economy, could the Roman Empire have even existed without it?
That's the million sisters question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's impossible to know for sure. But what we can learn from studying Roman economics isn't just about understanding their world. It's about looking at our own.
So what can we take away from this deep dive into the ways Romans made and lost money?
I think it's about recognizing that while the specifics may change, the currencies, the occupations, the fundamental human drives remain the same. The desire for wealth, the allure of status, the risks people are willing to take for profit. These are themes that echo throughout history.
It's like that saying, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Exactly. But what I find most fascinating is how these stories from ancient Rome challenge us to examine our own values and our own systems.
What do you mean?
Well, we look back at Roman slavery with horror. But are there practices in our own world that future generations might view as equally barbaric? That's something worth pondering, don't you think?
Absolutely. It's a good reminder that our own ways of life are not set in stone. We have responsibility to be critical, to challenge the status quo, and to strive for a more just and equitable world. And sometimes those conversations can start in the most unexpected places, like with a deep dive into ancient Roman economics. Thanks for listening.